really pleased to be here. Thank you so much for coming. This is the session on rethinking virtual professionalization courses for adult learners. It's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. Before we jump in, let me mention that I am located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people in Vancouver, BC. And I'm really grateful to be here with all of you. If you do want to learn more about the Indigenous communities of the lands where you are, I encourage you to take a moment to check that out later. Um, so I'm a small business owner. I have a background in grant facilitation and what I would call knowledge exchange. I know that there are a bunch of different terminologies of getting research out into the world in this room, and appreciate all of those different terms. Knowledge exchange is what I call it these days. But our organization, we work with academics, business owners, and other clients on funding proposals, media writing, and facilitating partnership strategies, helping people figure out who they want to work with, who they share goals with, and what ways they can collaborate in order to get things done. And we've recently launched our first training program, which is what I am excited to talk to you about today. Um, as the focus of this session, this conference was really interesting to me. I had already known for a long time that RIC is a fabulous organization that provides all kinds of useful programming for thinking about research impact from many different angles. I have a lot of respect for their work. And when I saw that RIC and ARIS were teaming up to focus specifically on grad students at work and professionalization, it just seemed to me like the perfect confluence of things that I'm really passionate about. So grateful for the opportunity to be here and thrilled that this is a focus for both organizations right now. Um, so thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to work through with you some of the things that I'm working on. This will be a very process-based session, and so I encourage you to think about how the learnings from what I'm talking about here can apply to your own work. So we'll talk about virtual facilitation strategies at a high level, and then I'll also give a segment of the program that we're developing so that you can see that, beginner's mind, participant lens of what we're trying to accomplish. So um, for the next hour or so, we'll talk about process, context, and how to foster effective learning environments. I want to create an inclusive space to engage. And for me, always, that means that starting with terms of reference is a critical step. This is something that I started doing in different ways when I was getting my PhD in the humanities. I'm a medievalist, and so our courses were very um, conversation focused. It was about getting everyone in the room to feel comfortable sharing their perspectives and arriving at some kind of consensus about patterns and themes, if not total agreement on the topic. And so the first step there is to let everyone know that their opinions are welcome. I anticipate in this space that that's a given. And if we had more time, I'd run through an exercise in how to do that together, how to create those terms together. But for now, here are some to get us started. So this is a space for open dialogue. We will listen with curiosity and speak with respect. It's a space to engage, so feel free to jump in. Unmuting and video are highly encouraged. Would love to see your faces. It's lonely out here staring at a bunch of black boxes. So it definitely helps me to be able to see you. But if you don't want to turn your video on, it's also totally fine to just participate in the chat when you can. Feel free to have conversations with other participants. I'm sure you've all had enough Zoom sessions to know that you can write to each other individually. You can also write to the group, and I'll be asking you to do that a couple of times, but all of these sessions are meant to meet you where you're at. So if you don't want to fully participate, that's your call. Feel free to step away if you need to. But yeah, just feel free to jump in, whichever way makes most sense to you. This is a space to connect. And so use the chat, use some of the resources they'll be providing later. If you are comfortable with it, you're very welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat now and share your contact details. If you don't want to, that's cool. The platform that they're using for this program, of course, also has great ways that you can connect with each other later. So encourage you to use those, and I'm sure the organizers would be happy to help you navigate those platforms if you need to. So the high level objective for this course, for this particular audience, is to share and test drive strengths-based strategies to design and co-facilitate or facilitate virtual programs. And that's something that I think we have all done on some level over the course of lockdown since the pandemic has started. Some of us are running major conferences like this one, and some of us are occasionally participating in team meetings, but there are some principles that cut across all of those different activities. Hi, Megan. Thanks for breaking the ice. So what I'd like everyone to do now is think about an experience with virtual program design. That can be a team meeting, that can be a massive conference, it can be a class, it can be anything in between. And if you can, use the annotation feature. So for me, that feature is at the top of my screen. If I put the mouse all the way up, options drop down and say annotate. For some of you, it may look a little bit different on your screen, depending on which version of Zoom you have. So if you're comfortable annotating, you can engage that way. If you want to write in the chat instead, that's also fine. I'll read out some of the responses. May invite some of you to voice yours. But think about a virtual program that you've designed or been involved in. And what I'd like to do is assess some of the challenges that we've had in running these programs. So, virtual facilitation can create a lot of anxiety. There are many, many tools floating around. Sometimes it's hard to know which ones to pick. Sometimes it's hard to read your audience. But there are also a lot of opportunities. So reflecting on the past year, give us a couple notes. Yeah, I see someone's getting involved in the annotation. That's great. So you can share your screen. Awesome. So you can use the text feature, you can use the drawing feature, but I'll just give you a couple minutes to reflect on how virtual facilitation has gone for you. See an X in opportunities. Maintaining novelty. Yeah, totally. People are zoomed out. Strong internet connection. Yeah, those logistical things are key, and low engagement. Sometimes that personal component comes out of it. And so, it's hard to motivate people to come. It's so easy to cancel when it's just clicking a button on your screen versus having to get up, especially when there's no food to incentivize people. That's a challenge these days. Motivation. Yeah, absolutely. We have to do it, right? We got to find solutions. Disconnection and all the unknowns. First time I ever facilitated an event like this, I couldn't figure out why. A colleague and I were host and co-host, and I couldn't figure out why I didn't have the breakout button on my screen. The entire event hinged on breakout rooms and just didn't have any, right? That's a little terrifying, but you learn those tricks over time. But the first time can be really intimidating. Accessibility, yeah, absolutely. Move radio programs that once covered. The person who wrote radio programs, would you like to unmute yourself and tell us what you mean? That sounds cool.
Yes, my name is Tiffany Willoughby, and I'm from the University of Texas at Dallas. And I think it was January of 2020, we had partnered with our radio station, our campus radio station, to launch a radio program designed to showcase the research that was taking place on campus. So we would interview researchers. And within 2 months, of course, we had to pivot on our heels, and we did just that. So the very first month we were in the pandemic, we went ahead and switched it over to a talk show style format. Virtually. And it's still going strong today, and we've actually created a new initiative around it within our office. So that was an area of opportunity I thought that I'd share with you.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a good example of something that can carry on beyond the pandemic, right? I mean, we're talking about all of these different programs and how to drive solutions right now, but these opportunities I think are so interesting because I think they have the potential at least to change how we engage forever now that we've kind of unlocked our brains to all these other possibilities. Yeah, I hear you. For me, it's not something I'll go into depth on today, but for our training program that I'll be talking about, we have a podcast component. And so in a way that I never would have thought I would be doing a couple of years ago, my closet has become a podcast studio. And that's something that I'll be able to keep doing for a long, long time. Does anyone else have an example they'd like to share before we go on? No, that's okay. You'll have plenty of opportunities. I'll keep bugging you to speak up. We could offer things for less money. Yeah, absolutely. This is the conference I probably never would have been able to attend if it weren't virtual. So those opportunities are golden. Um, yeah, stay connected. That's going to be a theme throughout our conversation today. Totally. So let me go back for a second. I'm going to print screen and share let me see. Just one moment for me. I want to make sure we capture this. And so I'll share that with all of you later if you like. Uh, yeah, got it. All right. More. Let me see. Sorry about this. One sec. Oh man. Annotate. Clear. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. So when I am designing a course, I've come, or any kind of virtual facilitation program, I've sort of adapted 3 principles that I try to use whenever I'm running a program. And these are principles that, I didn't come up with alone. I have some research partners at Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia that I'm working with, and we're working on ways to really evaluate these. So our research isn't quite at the stage where I can talk about our findings and our evaluation process, but that's something that we're applying to HICMA's summer 2021 course. And so in education psychology terms, this is referred to as creating agency for learners. And there are sort of 3 pieces that work really well for adult learners, and they're not specific to virtual contexts, but virtual contexts open up a whole new can of worms in terms of how we build them and apply them. And the first one is autonomy, right? When we spend our valuable time on a particular event like this one, it's helpful for adult learners to feel like they can contextualize what they're doing, right? We want to know how this applies to our direct context. And that means, to the extent that we can, giving people the opportunity to tailor and to reflect on how this work is working for them. Depending on the content, there are many different opportunities to create your own, choose your own adventure. But giving people that opportunity to see how the work is actionable in their lives and their roles really engages people and makes it drives attendance too. If you are clear in that in your messaging, it can make people feel like they're going to walk away from the next hour with some actionable steps. And so that brings me to the next point. Tangible outcomes are critical. And also having that peer community, right? I know a major motivation for all of us to be here is to get to connect with each other, that human piece, and also just the sort of logistical utility of building your network are both critical. And the more that you can embed those things in the work that you're doing, the more you give people opportunities to share strategies and ideas. And the presence of synchronous and asynchronous content opens up challenges and opportunities in how we do that. So when we talk about tangible outcomes, if you're delivering a course for busy professionals, as I mentioned, your participants are much more likely to engage when they know that they will walk away with something they can use. So an example from the course that we're doing in 2021, all of the participants in our course, it's an entrepreneurship for PhDs course designed to help people find or create meaningful work. And so everyone who walks out of that program will have a draft of a professional development plan. And so every module that we include in the course is designed to help them build a component of that. So every module, people walk away with something that they've created that is immediately useful. And they also walk away, hopefully, with an understanding of how that micro piece fits into the bigger picture of what they're building toward at the end. That's a strategy that I use because I think it keeps people engaged and interested, and also because it encourages attendance. It keeps people coming back and gives you that cumulative effect. And one of the challenges, of course, logistically and in terms of interest, is creating things that are useful in those bite size, even if someone doesn't have capacity to come every time, but still give that sense of the big picture. Something I'm always trying to problem solve and work on in different ways, and I'm sure many of us are. But then there's this piece of the water cooler, right? Like, we don't have those natural meeting points. I made a joke earlier that we don't have food anymore, right? I'm a grad student at heart, no matter how many years I go away. So I will show up for the free food, no matter how tangential the event seems to my work, just in hopes that I learn something. But we don't have that anymore. So how do we create the incentives to engage? And how do we create these spaces to engage? Asynchronous content presents challenges there because we don't have those natural human meeting points. We don't have the 15-minute breaks where you're chatting to your neighbor, but we do have social media. We do have asynchronous discussion threads. We do have wiki tools and Google Docs and all kinds of ways to engage and encourage people to engage on their own time. Someone mentioned sort of the opportunity to make these programs accessible to everyone. You can have people collaborating in 5 different countries, either in real time or on their own time. And that's something that I suppose was available to us before, but not in the same way. And I don't think we all realized the possibilities until now. But right, those asynchronous pieces can be really effective complements to the work that we do now. All right, so we're going to talk in a second about the strengths-based approach that we use in our programming. And so to get us started, what I would like you to do is share your wins. We talked at a high level about some of those challenges and opportunities. Give me an example of a time when you participated in a virtual event, coordinated it, designed it, or just showed up, and something that worked really well for you. So you could just post that in the chat, or if you want, you can unmute and talk about it. Tiffany's already given us one example that was great, but if anyone else wants to share, we'd really welcome your contributions.
Hi, this is Emily Ford. So we last summer pivoted, like everyone, to offer what would be an in-person summer program to an online program. But I think the biggest win for us was the training that we do for that summer staff, because the whole success of the program, if it's going to be successful, really is dependent on that staff really gelling together, really feeling prepared, but also feeling confident that the team is there for them, that we know who we are, that we know how to communicate, and that everything will be all right at the end of the day. And we were able to pull it off last summer, but doing it online really forced us to think creatively. So one thing that, like one specific example that comes to mind with that training week was I asked my yoga teacher. I practice yoga, and I've practiced yoga for many years. I asked him if he would be willing to come in, to our virtual space and offer a virtual yoga class for this group during this training week. And part of it was, okay, yes, we all need to move our bodies even though we're confined to our rooms, but he also modeled really great teaching, that like teaching techniques that we then talked about, reflected on, and that they could add to their toolbox in the teaching that they were going to do. But then also he opened himself up to questions of how he was able to navigate the transition from in-person teaching to online teaching. So it ended up, like the training week, I think was successful, but that one particular segment in particular, I think, we came at it from a little bit of a different angle, but I think it worked well.
I think that's a great example. And it also speaks to something that we're not going to talk about too much today, but a little bit we'll touch on, which is people have different learning styles, right? If you're a yoga teacher, you're probably used to working with people who think and learn in terms of movement, which is something that is hard to replicate in the virtual context. But I would wager that some of the strategies that you picked up were at least created with the mindset of helping learners who learn really effectively that way. For me, learning pedagogies from different sectors has been kind of eye-opening because, as I mentioned, I'm a humanist, I'm a medievalist. And when I was teaching in graduate school, I very rarely used slides, and my slides were all pretty bad because it just felt like an awkward component to me. But once I got into the field of knowledge mobilization or knowledge exchange. I started working with more folks who are in STEM and other sort of hard science disciplines. And when you're teaching, a doctor or a nuclear physicist or whoever, they expect the slides. And so if you want to meet people where they're at and in the ways that they're used to engaging and processing, incorporating different pieces into your learning style is a way to make sure you're not just teaching to people who learn the way you learn. I think for me, certainly, I had some blind spots, and once I started working with different people and getting evaluation on my programs, I started to learn ways that you could create a more inclusive experience for everyone in the room. Does anyone else want to share a win? No, you'll get more chances. As I mentioned, this is a pretty interactive one. At least it's trying to be. Okay, well, thank you for those, and thanks for everyone who's shared in the chat. My screen, by the way, I clicked on. I can't always see the chat, so if you put something in the chat and would really like to voice it out loud, or if someone has a question, can't hear me, wants me to slow down, please feel free to unmute and interrupt. I want to make sure that everyone is getting what they need out of this program. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of context about the program that we're developing. So our course is called Entrepreneurship for PhDs. My whole business has been built in the virtual context, partially because one of the reasons I went into it is that I saw the possibilities of community building, and I really realized how much I missed teaching from graduate school and wanted to make that a bigger part of my work. And I wasn't sure which program to start with, but the story behind this one is I've got lots of friends who are in this space right now. When you're a graduate student and you graduate, for many of us, feels like you're in free fall for a bit. You imagine a hang glider who jumps off a cliff, and it takes a bit to reorient yourself and figure out exactly how you need to angle yourself to soar. And that's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I think because we don't come at it with those intentional strategies, and there are differences in the ways that we're trained to think about our professionalism, we miss opportunities to find work faster and find work that's more aligned with what we want out of our next role. And so this course I see as a translation course. It's about figuring out what your strengths already are, and where might be a good fit, and thinking more expansively and creatively about all of the ways that you can bring value to the world. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish. We've got some smaller programs, such as our HICMA office hours that are free, and you can read about those on our website, but also our big 6-week course is coming up in July. And so just a little bit about our approach. So this is me using Aristotle in a Star Trek kind of way with this light board. Make your degree work for you. So our programs are designed by and for PhDs. My team, we're 3 women business owners who are also humanities PhDs. So we've got, more than a decade of teaching experience between us in different contexts, and we bring that to the way that we're thinking about building an inclusive curriculum. Amanda Boney is my program designer, and Nadia Sasso is our equity consultant. And so we've been brainstorming a lot how to develop this program differently than what's already out there. So inclusive curricula, expert design team, strengths-based approach. The link to our website is at the top of the chat, but also if you've downloaded the slides, I think you should be able to hyperlink directly from this one. So here's our team, and we're lucky that we're small. We're able to think on our feet. So over the course of the summer, we've been responding to feedback, and that constant program evaluation is a lesson that I think we can all take away, that the more feedback you get on what's working and what's not working, because we have so many tools available, it's little incremental shifts can really pivot on a large scale, especially if you've got a program that is able to attract 50 or 100 people. The better feedback you get, the more you can make your programs more accessible, more relatable, and better attended if that's one of your goals. But the strengths-based teaching method that we're talking about is something I'll go into here. But essentially, I fall back on Aristotle's 3 principles of persuasion as a way to think about how I build my system. And I call this entrepreneurship because it applies in the way that I'm building my business as a system, and also in the way that I think about relationships and engagement as ways to drive positive change forward. So ethos is your credibility, is sort of who are you as your authentic self and what are you bringing to the table. Um, Pathos is that human connection, who is your audience or who are your potential partners, and where is that common ground between what you want and what they want? What are your shared goals? And then the logos piece is the rationale that you used to make the case that you have that point of intersection. So in the context of this course, I think of it as the skills, but not just the skills themselves, also the way that you intentionally think about how you contextualize those skills for the people that you want to work with, and how you think about translating what you know and what you can do to open up those possibilities for collaboration and career growth. So here's our team having a little brainstorm on Zoom, of course. We're in, well, I'm in Vancouver, Nadia's in LA, and Amanda's in Indiana. So we, we have fun for sure. So to move on to the program that I'm going to talk about, I mentioned that there's a segment from this course that I'm going to use as an exercise, and I've modified it to be more relevant to the group here, but you'll see some of the approaches that we're taking. And so the learning objective for this segment that I mentioned in the abstract is translate your core professional skills for different target audiences. I think it's useful, speaking to that solutions-driven piece, to let people know what they can anticipate out of your program. However, the more that I was thinking about which segment to pull out for this learning objective, I realized that, to be honest, there are 3 learning objectives buried in here. So one is translate. How do you translate? What are you translating? What are the mechanisms of translation, right? That could be a segment in itself, and in the course, in fact, it is. That before you can translate your core professional skills, of course, you have to know what they are. And I think that's something that graduate students in particular struggle with, because the focus is so niche for so long that it's hard to think abstractly about what your achievements and your competencies and the ways that you're working in the world apply to any other context. You're so used to thinking, with blinders on, with the mission of getting the thing that you're working on done, that it's hard to have that abstraction. And so finally, there's this different target audiences piece. If you're thinking about translating for target audiences, you first have to figure out who those target audiences are, who you're writing to, why are you translating for them, what is your goal here? And so it's really that target audiences piece that we'll be talking about here today. But to give you a high level of where the things we're talking about today fit in. So the strengths-based approach that I'll talk about in a second comes in week 2. It's this idea of choosing what you have to offer, figuring out what it is that you're bringing to the table so that you can then think about what to do with that information. First, you have to recognize it. And then week 3 is mapping opportunities. So I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that, but just to position them so that you have a sense that we're kind of coming in the middle and media res here, trying to figure out how we help people think a little bit more creatively about what their pathways could be, more expansively. And so, yeah, I won't jump ahead of myself here. So the first key is lead with your strengths. What do I mean by that? I mean, thinking about not only what you bring to the table, what you have to offer, thinking about the pieces of evidence, essentially, that you have to make the case that you can bring value to an organization, but also recognizing the strengths that are out there. And sometimes that means recognizing your own gaps and turning those gaps into opportunities to learn. PhDs, grad students in general, and I think everyone in this room, given what we're interested in, is driven by their intellectual curiosity and that drive to think about, to try to problem solve and try to understand what else is out there, what else you need to learn, that you might call it a beginner's mind, is something that we think about in the context of our research, in the context of our work and our attempts to drive research impact. But it's not always something that we think about in terms of the job search itself or the act of finding partners and opportunities. And that's, I think, a missed opportunity often. Some people get there, many people who graduate and are sort of stumbling for those first couple of years. I think that's what ends up creating this narrative that anecdotally I hear all the time where people end up in a role that isn't quite the right fit, but then their intellectual curiosity kicks in and they're able to get oriented and figure out what they actually want to do because they've had this experience of having to translate and contextualize. And so then your intellectual curiosity kicks in and you see what other people are doing and you learn about little snatches of things and you say, there, that's what I care about. That's what I want to do. And so the premise behind what we're trying to teach is that you can get there faster if you recognize that that's something that you're already good at. So before we dive into the strengths-based approach, what I'd like you to do is take 5 minutes and do this brief exercise. So think over the last 6 months and just to yourself in your notebook. You don't need to share, although you're welcome to. Talk about a time when you received positive feedback in a professional setting. It can be something super minor or it could be a full-on performance review. Think about when someone else observed that you did something well. Then think about a time when you faced a challenge and overcame it. So you had to struggle with something, but you found a solution, or you talked to a colleague and worked through it. And third, just think about what parts of your work make you feel good. Some people call this flow. When's the last time you got lost in your work or finished, walked out of a meeting and felt like you really crushed it? So yeah, just take 5 minutes. It's 11. Oh, it's 1:18, I suppose, for many of you. So take 5 minutes and at 1:23, we'll kick back in. All right, I'm going to ask everyone to sort of come back and focus. The reason I asked you to do this exercise is twofold. One, I try to appeal to a bunch of different learning styles. And so some people learn by writing and by working on their own and don't necessarily want to share publicly, but do need that little bit of time to reflect. And so that reflection piece is something that we would be doing in the course before the exercise segment that I'm bringing you back to now. And the other reason is to start shifting gears toward getting in participant mode. So thinking through how it would be to be on the other side of this course. I'm trying to balance giving the high level of why I'm doing the things that I'm doing and also the experience of actually participating so that you can try it from both sides. So as I mentioned, strengths has to do with your internal strengths and your external strengths. So figuring out your research skills, your teaching skills, your side hustle skills, which can be student government or an actual job or volunteering, all different ways that you engage, the things that you're drawn to outside of the work of your degree. Grad students are so busy all the time focused on what they're doing. If you're making time for something else, it's probably because you're passionate about it and likely good at it. So attending to those things can be really useful. Also your network, the people that you meet through your work and through all other components of your life are a massive strength that we don't often consider. And finally, that intellectual curiosity piece that I talked about. You can't do it alone, though. You do need strengths in others. So what do they know? How do they lead? Who do they know? And what problems are they solving? And if you think of your intellectual curiosity as your strength, rather than the things that you do or don't know, then the drive to fill your knowledge gaps becomes a strength too, because it enables you to connect with other people and have networking sessions and informational interviews and even job interviews that are focused on learning as much as you can and situating yourself and constantly reframing what it is that you're bringing to the table and what it is that you really want to learn in order to succeed. So the approach that I take is based on work that I've done with the Community Engagement Office and the Knowledge Exchange Unit at UBC. And one of the things I like to cite is this idea from Duncan. And I use this all the time when I'm talking about researchers. We have this, sometimes we call it the hero complex. It's something that comes up a lot when I'm working with academics who want to work with Indigenous communities. You come in and say, I have the solution to all of your problems, right? And you try to train to say, no, both sides have assets. That approach is not collaborative. It's likely not going to make people open to working with you. And it doesn't lay the groundwork for a conversation about shared goals and shared strategies. So recognizing all of these pieces, these assets in terms of people, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of solutions that already exist and are already in process, thinking through all of these things. And this slide, again, is available in the ones you can download if you want to come back to it. And the source from which I adapted it is also available in the slide. So, always good to have a little self-deprecation in your own approach. This is a high-level shot of my own career development. The reason that I show it is that I think it's useful to show that a lot of this is circuitous. It's a common narrative for many graduate students who try to work outside of academia, and it takes a long time to see the patterns. So for me, went to a conference in January of the year that I graduated, and someone said, create a LinkedIn profile. So I did. It was actually really useful as a translation exercise. And it enabled me to start looking for jobs through keywords. But what keywords did I use? I was convinced I wanted to work in cultural heritage management. I was really passionate about saving old things. That was a lot of the work that I did in my dissertation was about making people appreciate or helping people to appreciate things that have fallen off the radar of history. And so that's what I wanted to do. But I used those 3 keywords, and I found a couple jobs that had those 3 keywords. And I found one person on LinkedIn that was a tangential connection who worked at an organization that was working on those problems. Wrote to that one person, said, I'm interested in this. Can we chat? He said, I'm actually in the middle of a job transition. Can we connect later? I said, yes, of course, but took it as a rejection, never followed up. And then, started working on what else I was going to do. And in the meantime, I was writing my dissertation and applying for anything that seemed remotely like it might be a good fit. And, also life happened. I graduated, I moved, I, got engaged, all these things. And so then I did have a few interviews and job offers over the next 10 months or so. My partner and I narrowed down to a couple of geographic locations, and I started to get a sense of where I was getting bites in terms of my job materials. I started to get the hang of that translation piece and learn when I got those early stage interviews what was piquing people's interests and what I could highlight more. And I did. I got a job offer in DC at a cultural institution, which I was really excited about. It seemed like a good fit, maybe not a perfect fit, but I was pumped. And then my partner he's an academic, so we had the 2-body problem, of course, but we got to move to Vancouver, which was, wonderful and amazing, and led to a whole other career pathway that I had never anticipated. And first job interview where the questions that I was asked was a fantastic team. And so their interview questions caused me to spontaneously start thinking about all of my experiences and how they could apply to this grant development role, which was not something that I had considered as an avenue for myself. So I went through a couple of, various promotions and career changes over a few years. And then, long story short, found my way to the work that I'm doing now, which feels at this point like a really great convergence of a lot of things that at the time felt very random and disconnected. But I've realized over time that ability to think through why I was making the choices that I'm making and to get more focused about what my intentions were and what was important to me, that's what's really led me to feel like I have a bird's eye view to be able to talk to others. But just to show that it's pretty circuitous and acknowledging that is the case for a lot of people and that it creates a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, that you really have to tap into your resilience also. Sometimes it helps to think through it that way a few years out. And so if I were doing the job search again now, I would, think about how the problem is being solved right now. Who are all of the different people involved in cultural heritage management? Who can I talk to? What should I ask them? What are my knowledge gaps? And finally, what are all the things that I can bring to the table? Turns out I'm really good at grant development. That's something that can apply to almost any context. Never occurred to me to think about, the role that might play in cultural heritage management, even though I had won a number of grants in grad school. It just didn't occur to me. And I think getting that bird's eye lens is very helpful, and it's asking questions that gets you there. So we tend to think about, the landscape in segments. If you apply for the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada partnership portfolio grants, which is something that I worked on a lot over the last few years, they tend to categorize partners into, you're looking to work with a partner organization in the public, private, or not-for-profit sector on a need, challenge, or opportunity. I love that language, but it illustrates this idea that we tend to break things into systems or into segments. And so it took a long time for me to put together that when we're creating a context map and separating all of these pieces, you tend to think in buckets. You tend to think, I want to work for a nonprofit, or I want to work for industry, rather than this is the topic that interests me. And there's a whole spectrum of people involved in this context who are doing interesting work. How are they doing it? Who are they working with? What are the real opportunities there? And so it's that point of connection. So for instance, instead of thinking about government and industry as these monolithic bodies, you can think about different levels of government in, any country or internationally. With industry, we hosted our first Take My Office Hours a few weeks ago with the director of UX research at Verizon. And there were lots of questions about how you get into industry. And she and I were chatting and kind of looked at each other and said, wait a second, I'm a small business owner. I'm industry also in the way that we tend to define it. But right, our organizations, our roles, our motivations are just so very different. So breaking down those segments is useful, but better yet, finding the points of connection between them. So, when has the National Endowment for the Humanities partnered with tourism agencies? I'm aware now of partnerships between state humanities councils in the US and app developers to create cultural appreciation resources and things like that. There is such a thing as a cultural heritage consultant. What do they do? I would have to ask them to really understand it better, but certainly they're working with all kinds of organizations and they probably include grant writers. All right, so now we're gonna move on to our activity. And I'm gonna escape for a second so that I can see you all and stop sharing. All right, this activity is gonna involve a Google document. And so I'm gonna share the link to that here. You should all be able to edit, and I'm going to ask Angela. Angela, are you there?
Yes. Would you like 3 breakout rooms?
Sure. How many participants do we have?
Without the rest of us, 8.
Okay. Yeah, let's do 2 breakout rooms. Yep. And so you all have the link in the chat. If you just click on that before you go to your rooms. You'll have 1 each, and you'll see the instructions there, but essentially choose the person in your group who is, say, the most advanced in their field, and you can decide how to divvy that up. But I am copying the Keynote challenge yesterday. So yeah, break into your groups, take a look at your segments, and the goal here is to try to context map that person's piece. So you're going to have different roles. There's the person whose context is the focal point. I'd like for one person to be the note taker writing in the group, and another person to report back when we do the debrief. If you're feeling very creative, someone is welcome to draw a picture and post it in the Google Doc, but that's totally optional. I know that's not everyone's bag. Before we break into those groups, any questions from anyone? Observations? Anything you want to problem solve? Okay. All right. Well, I'll give you about, let's say, 15 minutes for this exercise, and we'll see you back shortly. Hey, welcome, welcome. Thanks everyone for coming back. How was it? Thumbs up, thumbs down, middle? Pretty good? Yeah, all right, well, cool. So who are the reporters? Group 1 reporter, Megan and Julie. Megan, why don't you go first? Will you tell us a little bit about how your group went?
Sure. We were, I think, technically group 2 in the document. But our focal person was Ellen Iverson, very reluctantly, but she won the contest. And she's the evaluation director for the Science Education Research Resource Center at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, home of Malto Meal. Fun fact. And apparently a lot of retired Lutheran ministers.
Interesting.
We chat a lot. Do I need to go through like what we didn't get through all of the questions?
There were a lot of questions. Will you just tell me maybe one insight or pattern or takeaway that you drew away from the exercise?
I think the thing that was cool to me, at least, was thinking about what is like the same string that's gone through their career path, because she's changed entire industries. Went from like architecture to computer, like coding and software stuff above my head, to higher ed and evaluation. But she's always been at the crossroads of like where science meets human interaction and how to use technology to further that along. And she kind of wove that into all of those, which seemed kind of the coolest takeaway if you think about it, you know, as something being woven. What's the connecting factor? And
Yeah.
she came to it rather easily, it seemed like.
Huh. Neat. Well, thank you, Ellen, for being a volunteer, and thanks, Megan, for reporting back, and thanks to your note taker. Who's the note taker?
Dawn.
Done. Okay, great. Well, thank you. How about
Tiffany was
you?
our artist.
Oh, nice. All right. Well, Tiffany, if you're so inclined, you're welcome to post the image in the chat. Or did you do it by hand or?
I actually did it in PowerPoint, so I just made 2 slides, and it's very simple, but I'll save it to my computer and I'll drop it in the chat in a moment.
Oh, perfect. Look at you. All right. You can also share your screen if you want. It's up to you.
Oh, okay.
I think you can. If you do you have permissions.
Let me go ahead and try.
A few minutes and a small group. I wonder if we could talk about whether and how any of the stuff we've covered today applies to your work. I mean, maybe starting with breakout rooms. Who's used breakout rooms in their activities? Okay, Emily. Yeah, most of us. They're kind of an interesting tool. For me, one of the interesting challenges of breakout activities is I discovered this early on when I started using them. You can't lurk. When I teach in person and set up these group activities, you kind of go and you hover and you try to find that perfect moment to edge yourself in. And in breakout rooms, sometimes you appear like a fairy godmother and the conversation just halts. So the Google Docs are one of the ways that I've tried to get around that in general. I try not to use too many tools because people have to spend a lot of time learning them, but I just creating something where I can see how it's going. And I know that people can always call me in if they need me, but in general, I can kind of keep tabs on how it's going and think through how to do the debrief based on what's happening. I find that really useful for my own style. And then as a facilitator, it can be exhausting for a lot of us, but you also get a moment to collect your thoughts and maybe get ready for the facilitation piece. How about you? What has worked for you in terms of breakout rooms?
Similar to that, something I didn't do this myself, but there was a series of meetings led by a colleague of mine, and he would start every session would have a set aside time for everyone to brainstorm and collaborate in a shared Google Doc. And so you would start the meeting, but it would, there would be 10 minutes of silence. But everyone would be typing into the shared document. And then that would inform the discussion and where it would go. It was the first time of course I joined a minute or something late and I couldn't figure out, you saw all of these faces, but complete silence. But everyone was very actively engaged in the Google document. It was just an interesting approach to it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That would work well for my learning style. Well, we've got just a couple of minutes left. So one thing I'm going to do is paste in the chat. I'll do it here. So here, I'm going to post on my LinkedIn in a minute the empathy map with the annotations that we had earlier. I tweeted it out while you were all in the breakout room, but if anyone wants that image, that's where it'll be. But yeah, as a sort of parting exercise, I always like to end with coming up with a few actionable next steps. And we don't necessarily have time to debrief on everyone's with each other, but I'd encourage you to come up with 3 things, either that you saw something in the presentation and you were like, oh, I'm never doing that. Or you saw something and you're like, yeah, maybe that could work for my next meeting. But as a parting thought, does anyone have one thing that they might try a little differently the next time they have a virtual event? No? All right. Well, I'll leave you to mull that over, I suppose. Oh, Tiffany, go ahead.
To be honest with you, I have not played around with Google Docs. So I like the idea of using those and implementing them in breakout rooms. I've done some jigsaw activities with breakout rooms, you know, to kind of hold everyone accountable. And I've also used Microsoft Teams forms. So I'd really like to kind of do a deep dive into Google Docs and see if that's something I could do that's new, and yeah, take a back seat into the popping into rooms. So that would be something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for engaging. I know I've thrown a lot of different interactive activities at you today. It's sort of like to try them all so people can get a sense of different learning styles, but I know it takes a little stepping out into something different. And so appreciate you engaging and being here. And if anyone does want to brainstorm their next event and how it might look and strategies, very happy to connect. You've got my LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This was really nice.
Thank you so much.
Oh, pleasure. See you at the next. Oh, thanks, Don. Yeah, see you at the next thing. Yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye.